Hello, everyone who's joining. I'm watching our attendees numbers climb. Just want to let you know we're going to start officially at 4:05 to give folks time to check in. And I'm just going to tell you that like every minute, I'm going to chime in and say we're going to start at 4:05. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We want to give everyone time to log in. We know that Zoom can have issues, especially because they just did an update like 2 or 3 days ago. So we're going to start at 4:05. So you should feel very safe at this moment if you want to get up, get a drink of water, attend to your biological needs. Welcome to those still joining. We're going to give it just 2 more minutes before we start. So at 4:05, we will begin. It's 4:04 now. We will start in 1 minute just to give folks a chance to join. So I'll start talking again in a minute. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion of the award-winning documentary, The Prison Within. Breaking the traditional format of prison films, this feature documentary shows viable and hopeful alternatives to the current justice system, granting viewers access to the interior lives of prisoners and survivors of violent crime. The Prison Within is a moving and inspiring exploration of the healing and transformation possible when people are accountable, forgiven, and empowered to give to society with dignity and compassion. My name is Jessica Cobb. I am here just to host the dialogue. I am director of Norco College's Prison Partnership. For those of you who are not already familiar with our prison partnership, Norco College serves students currently incarcerated at California Rehabilitation Center, Norco, a state prison for men, with courses in the associate degree for transfer pathways in sociology and in business administration. We currently enroll about 250 students. I'm here this evening with Troy Williams and Sean LaFleur. Troy Williams was one of the cinematographers and one of the subjects of The Prison Within, and he's going to engage in a dialogue with Sean. I'll give fuller biographies for both of them in a moment before we transition to their dialogue. I'm here just to host the webinar and field questions from the audience. You may have already come with questions after having watched the film, or you may have questions come up as you listen to their dialogue. Please type those questions into the Q&A. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, next to share screen or participants, mute, all that stuff, you'll see a Q&A box. You'll click on that, type in there, I will get your questions. The chat will not work. I believe the chat is disabled, so you may not even see it. So please use the Q&A. Before we begin our conversation, there's just a little bit of norm setting I want to do. So The Prison Within touches on, or really centers around, issues of trauma, incarceration, and of narrative. So I'm going to give everyone attending this webinar a shared basis to have a conversation around these issues. First, trauma lives in the interaction between the brain and the body. So please pay attention to your own body as you're listening to this conversation and as you're remembering and thinking about the film. If you find yourself at any point feeling tense or clenching up or feeling that kind of like heavy heartbeat or shallow breath, as your body is able to do so, I recommend uncrossing your arms and legs, placing your feet flat on the floor, placing your hands on your thighs, and just taking slow, deep breaths to calm and center yourself. But also, your video is disabled on Zoom. So if at any point you need to get up, move around, walk out of the room, please feel free to do so. The dialogue we can have may bring up some difficult issues, and it's important to take care of yourself. Second, one of the techniques of incarceration is to dehumanize the people who experience carceral institutions, such as prisons or jails. To center people's shared humanity, I'm going to use people first language when I'm reading your questions. So when talking about people who are experienced or having experienced or who have experienced incarceration, you're going to hear me use the terms formerly incarcerated, incarcerated person, or just man or woman or person instead of terms like inmate. Third, with regard to narrative, people have the right to share and to shape their own narratives, especially in relation to sensitive topics like trauma and healing. So I'm going to ask that our participants, our audience, refrain from asking intrusive questions about Sean's or Troy's experiences with harm or with carceral systems, unless those issues come up in their discussion, unless they raise those issues, and then you should feel free to engage their points. I also want to say that when I present your questions, Sean and Troy should feel free to not answer any questions I share or to say, I'm not comfortable with that. We're going to run this webinar from 4 to 5:30. So we're going to kick off with a dialogue between Sean and Troy. We have scheduled to 6 in case we need to run over, but we're hoping to keep it within that time so that none of us get Zoom fatigued. And so I may not have time to address all of your questions, but what I'll try to do is I'll try to select questions that hit on common themes so that even if your exact question isn't answered, that you'll get an answer to the kind of topic you are raising. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. Troy Williams served 25 years in juvenile and adult prison facilities. While incarcerated, Williams became a certified paralegal, founded a video and first award-winning audio production program within a prison called the San Quentin Prison Report, SQPR. Williams co-founded San Quentin's financial literacy program and FEEL Philosophy, Financial Empowerment Emotional Literacy, and served as the executive director of San Quentin's Restorative Justice Interfaith Roundtable. After paroling in 2014, Williams served on the Alameda County's Probation Chiefs Advisory Council, the San Francisco District Attorney's formerly incarcerated advisory board, Oakland's Public Safety and Services Oversight Commission, SSOC, as a board member for Uncommon Law, the Oakland Private Industry Council, the Northern chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, Open Gates Men's Advisory Council, and the Life Comes From It Advisory Circle. He's going to be engaging in dialogue with Sean LaFleur. Sean is a current student at Norco College who also has impressive bona fides in social justice and in carceral reform. He is the president of Liberated Scholars, Norco College's club for students whose lives have been impacted by systems of criminal prosecution and incarceration. He is also a co-chair of one of the 3 subcommittees of Norco College's Racial Justice Task Force, a member of the Inland Empire Fair Chance Coalition, and a current fellow with the Participatory Action Research Project of Starting Over Inland Empire. Take it away, Sean and Troy.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Definitely appreciate you. Troy, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well, and thank you, Jessica, for the warm welcome and great introduction.
Okay, well, I guess we'll get right into it. Troy, thank you once again. So, restorative justice, in your own words, what is that?
Wow, diving right in the deep end, huh?
Right away.
Well, you know, when I first heard about restorative justice, I viewed it just as an opportunity to make change in a way that felt effective and real, like to me. You know, the ability to effect change, not in your own life and other people's lives, in a way that does not continue to demonize, but that helps to like rebuild the bridges that were broken as a result of whatever harm was caused. So I'm not sure if the audience is familiar with restorative justice, but as it was taught to me, our criminal justice system, basically when something happens or something goes wrong, the criminal justice system looks at who did it and how do we punish it. So restorative justice brings about the concept of what harm was caused and how do we rebuild the relationship that was broken as a cause of that harm, right? And so for me, restorative justice is a way to rebuild relationships.
Awesome. You said effective, and you kind of touched on it a tad bit when you said the word demonize as well. How do you feel restorative justice, not just in building relationships, because that's also important, but how is this also important for the person who has basically committed a crime or transgression?
Right. So there's a difference between bringing attention to the harm someone did as opposed to identifying the person as the harm. Just like when Jessica started us off with people first, like language is very important, right? Like I can talk about what was done wrong in a way of the harm, but if I demonize the person, then I'm separating myself from the person, and oftentimes in society, it's a better bridge building tool to look at the harm that was caused and not demonize the person, not to say like you're this, you know, you're this or you're that or you're this bad person or whatever, and instead look at like what happened, what you did had this result, what you did affected other people's lives, whether we're calling it a crime or not. Like actions affect people, actions affect human beings, actions affect relationships.
Okay, very well spoken. So basically it goes beyond just the normal accountability, as because I've been incarcerated as well, is because they always say, oh, be accountable, you did wrong and that's it, but it goes beyond that. And when you go through that process, since I didn't go through that process while I was incarcerated, but you did, how does that feel going in there day in and day out, and when you're actually building yourself up to become somebody who is able to contribute back to the community?
Right. And I want to say this too, while you may not have, like you say, went through like this formal process, I can tell by having spoken with you and been in conversation with you a number of times, you have gone through a process, right? And so
Okay,
that
sure.
process does not have to necessarily be this formalized process that happens within some institutional setting, right? Because before we had the word restorative, the whole concept of restorative justice is based on indigenous practices. And so we can't forget that our ancestors and the indigenous people of different lands had this practice long before we start calling it restorative justice. And they start giving out degrees or certificates based on, restorative justice. So, but I gotta say that being in an environment where some of my elders on the yard who had brought this whole, array of programs and opportunities for transformation, it was healing. It was healing to be able to sit around people both on the inside and the outside that could like give you guidance in a way that you could take it in.
Yeah. You mentioned people on the outside. As per the film, we see that you have people come in, but how do you think that catapulted the process from having such a diverse exchange and information and healing?
Well, so if we're talking about like the programs, if that's what
Yes.
we're talking about. So one thing I always like to say when I talk about these programs is how, another concept of restorative justice is that all the stakeholders have to be at the table, right? You can't effect change without all of the stakeholders at the table, right? With the community at the table. And so what happened inside, specifically, if we're talking about inside of San Quentin, is that you had a lot of, older guys who saw the need for change. And they had a skill set, they're peacemakers and all kind of, people who do things to sort of diffuse and quell problems inside, if you will. But they knew that they needed some additional skill sets. So what they did, they reached to outside community to come in to provide those skill sets. And then at that time, you also had an administration that saw the benefit of allowing these different type of skill sets to come in. And the community got together. The community developed these programs, both the if you're talking about Vogue or Victim Offenders Education Group, or we're talking about any of the other restorative justice programs, these programs were developed by men inside alongside with volunteers outside, both having equal input into what these programs would look like, and that's important if you're going to have change in the community. It can't be this topside or lopsided version of what needs to happen in my community, because you're going to have a hard time coming into my community in certain areas trying to do certain things if you're not from around there, if you understand what I mean.
Very much so. In the process that you described is a beautiful collaboration, and transferring to our community and a community college where we at right now. How do you think that plays a part into having people like you or myself working with the advisors, teachers, and faculty to create more prosperous and beneficial programs?
Absolutely. Well, like, I'm thankful for that question, and a bunch of stuff is running through my mind. One, I got to give a shout out to a few people. I think about, Denise and Mildred, who came into, I originally met them on another campus, but we were able to start up a program called Rise on the campus of Chabot College here in Hayward, California. And, you know, we had the President Sperling, we had the vice president who basically, you know, championed, you know, the cause for us on campus. And they saw the importance of having somebody with lived experience that could be there to walk side by side with people who were coming onto campus that had similar experiences. They they knew that they could only go so far without us, and we could only go so far without them, right? And the program is like a major success because of that, because they understood the importance that when you have somebody like myself or like you that understands all the little subtle things that's not said,
Exactly.
right? Because a lot of us don't like to reach out for help. A lot of us will pretend like we got it all together, and we'll say certain things, and you know, we can fool the best of the best. But it's certain little things and little signs that we know, and we make that follow up, and we make that calls, and we go walk with people. You know, I used to walk around the campus with people like I used to walk, you know, laps with my youngsters on the yard. You know, we walk around and we talk about their day. We interfacing with teachers who may not, who some may have and some didn't have a real clear understanding of why is this person late? You know, why is this person not turning in assignments, or what's going on in this person's like head that this person is, you know, disconnected from class, right? There could be 1,000 reasons. And if you have the experience and you know how to bring that two together, we know how to, we can act as sort of like a liaison or an interpreter between people who've been in our situation, and then by us also understanding the academic side and being able to communicate on that side, we're able to build a bridge.
Exactly. You're basically describing like effective leadership. And, you know, I've been in leadership positions prior to my own personal incarceration, but I always say incarceration, it taught me how to be effective because it kind of taught me how to get to the heart of the problem. It taught me how to teach and talk to the heart. How do you feel that affects you now in whatever it is that you're doing, like your media company and your mentorship? Do you feel that incarceration played a huge role in your leadership skills, or a minimal role?
Well, I mean, first, I wish it never happened.
True.
You know, I gotta say that first. I wish
it did.
I wish that I would have got my lesson prior to prison.
Yeah.
But because I didn't, I went to prison. And when I look at it, all the things, like if you don't deal with what your issues are, you're gonna have to deal with them sooner or later. You only can run from them so much, right? And I ran as far as and as much as I could run. And then when you're sitting inside them four walls and left with nowhere else to run, you realize I gotta face my issues, right? Because my issues, the issues that I had is what led me to prison. Exactly. And by not facing those issues, it sunk myself deeper into the culture and into the prison and the destructive type environment. And so I used to look at it like when I started to turn my life around, I looked at it like I was walking in this upside down world. I knew that my thinking was so upside down that whatever my first thought was, I remember telling myself that I need to do the opposite of what that first thought was. Yeah. Right. And then I remember saying to myself, like, I'm going to leave breadcrumbs because when I find my way out, I'm going to have to help others, you know, find their way out. Right. I'm going to have to retrace this. This is going to be a road that I'm going to have to journey back and forth across because I have an obligation now to go back and try to, you know, I can't undo my own past, but I surely can remove some of the obstacles, you know, for other people. And that's my goal. So, you know, it informs me. It in my what I've been through as a young person going through emotions to, you know, joining the gang and, you know, and I tell you, I was as crazy as the craziest gangbanger could be, to being in the prison, to doing a shoe turn, you know, to living that prison life, to re-educate myself, you know, and involving myself in programs to participating and facilitating and then creating programs. Like it's been a journey. It's been a journey, and it informs everything that I do.
Awesome, awesome. You mentioned the culture, and how do you feel about culture and the culture that you existed in, and how did you kind of you didn't escape it because you're still part of the culture, but you, like you say, you change. And how did you do that? And when did you do that? It happened inside your incarceration?
Well, so first, while I think certain aspects of the culture may not have changed, I changed my perspective about it. You know, I used to always like many of us do, right? I used to be like, well, this the hand I've been dealt. You know, I'm just a product of my environment. You know, I used to say stuff like that, right? Like this just the way it is. And I used to always talk as though like I really had it rough. And then I actually met one of the Lost Boys. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Lost Boys were, they were about maybe 30, 40,000 young kids who were in a village in the Sudan one day. And military came in and started, shooting up their village, killed all of their parents, and they were forced to trek across the jungle to try to reach place of safety. And this guy watched his friends, get eaten by lions or hyenas. He watched his friends, as they got chased across by, machine gun fire, got chased and had to try to swim across the Nile River. They watched their friends getting eaten by, crocodiles and what have you. And after hearing what this person went through, like I felt I didn't have a right to complain about my childhood, and here's this person was actually doing some great things with their life. And so that kind of snapped me out of that woe is me illusion, and he gave me a different perspective about if this person can move through his environment after what he'd been through, then I can move through my environment after what I've been through.
Yeah, awesome. For myself first, for me, it was a volunteer process, being in prison, especially some of the places I was, they didn't have really any programs. So, I just took it upon myself to be better, to do better, and to learn more. The restorative justice process, is that a volunteer process, or do they actually place you inside those programs from the administration?
It's completely volunteer. You can't have a forced restorative justice process, right? It has to be, it's completely volunteer. And when people come to the table, they come to the table with an honest and open heart because they're seeking to either mend the harm or build a bridge or learn something from their own harm. Because most, the truth is that, I would venture to say all people in prison at some point have been also a victim of crime. So just because a person is in prison because they committed the crime, I think it's important for people to understand that these same people have also been victims of crime as well. And some of us, we deal with things differently.
Yeah, very true. And I found that one of the biggest misconceptions that people have when they have their own perceptions about us is that we're forced to be here, we're forced to improve, when that's not true, when it's really a personal decision. Because if I didn't want to be here, I wouldn't be here. But they think for some reason that we're just forced to be good. But there are plenty of people who say, you know what, I'm just not doing it. So when you see somebody in there showing up, it's already saying so much about who they are and their character.
Absolutely. And everybody that tried to force me, they caught the beast.
Yeah.
I'm not a person, even to this day, I don't deal with force very well.
Exactly.
I don't do force. You can't force me. I don't do force. That doesn't settle with my spirit. But it wasn't until somebody empathized with me that I then learned to empathize with others.
Awesome. And you touched on people being a victim of crime. Restorative justice, it deals a lot with trauma. And what I've learned in prison is that, wow, you know, everybody around here is hurting, including myself. You know, we've all had these traumatic experiences, and somehow along the way we've normalized trauma. What is your opinion on that?
I'm not quite sure if I understand the question. Say it again.
What is your opinion on the fact that my perspective and what I experienced in prison is that most of us in prison experience some type of trauma, as you said, for being victims. What is your opinion on that? That it was just a lot of hurt people in prison, not necessarily bad people, but people who have been just really hurt.
Right. You got people trying to find their way. Like just now, this is probably going to sound weird for a lot of people, but it's my truth, and I always speak my truth. I grew up gangbanging. I didn't see myself any different than what an American soldier saw himself, right? Like, if you come and you bomb my Twin Towers, guess what? I'm gonna bomb your building, and I bet you won't come back over here with that nonsense anymore, right? And so, but instead of bombs, we had weapons. We had other kind of methods that we use, right? Not justifying any of it, but I'm just saying, how is it that we can justify war on one level and then completely disavow it on another level, right? At some point, I think we as a society have to look at the contradictions that we have in our society and try to figure out ways to mend those contradictions so that we're not like leaving people forced to feel like, you know, growing up gangbanging, like we couldn't, where I come from, we couldn't trust the police. Yeah. The police wasn't there to protect me. You know, I learned that at a very, very young age because of my first incident with the police. Innocent 7-year-old child. I was harassed by the police and told that I was burglarizing some cars. And I was 7, I didn't even know what burglarize meant. I was about as innocent as a 7-year-old child could be, right? And they act like I was some kind of 7-year-old sophisticated criminal. And the only thing I was doing was playing follow the leader with my 2 little brothers. Yeah. Right. So that taught me at a very young age, don't trust the police. And so when people came to my rescue, when these gangs came to my rescue, that became my family. That became my attachment. That became my protective force. Right. And so I sunk into that madness. So if we're really going to deal with the problems in our society, we got to deal with them from the top down. Yes. We can't justify harm and wrongdoing on one level and then disavow it because it's coming from a lower, weaker position.
Awesome. That's deep, and that's righteous. That's real. I appreciate you saying that. Wow, man, you made me lose my train of thought. That was true. But what would you say? What would you say to the people who say we don't deserve anything? Even as you just expressed, I do understand personally. I understand that, you know, some of us have experiences that are unparalleled to the mass population or the majority of people. You know, we exist in these pockets inside America, and not saying we're that different, but there are some differences there in, you know, how some of us grow up. So what would you say to the people who say we don't even deserve a chance or a second chance?
So I got 2 sides. There's a part of me that goes, who are you to say what another human being deserves, right? Like a part of me, that's a part of me. That's a side that wants to buff up against force, right? And then there's another part of me that is curious about, like, why? What makes you feel like that? And how is that attitude actually serving our community, right? Like how and why? Like I would really want to be involved in a real like dialogue with this person or the people that say that to understand what makes them say that, right? Like, yeah. And I think at some point our society, we're gonna have to have a deeper dialogue and be real about our dialogue, right? And be real about a real conversation that has to be had about about why we have such big differences in our society, in American culture. Because I mean, we can keep trying to force other people to do, or we can try to love each other and see how that works. I don't think we really tried to love each other yet in this country, right? And it kind of sounds weird me saying this, like we should all just love each other and sing kumbaya or something, right? But it's real. Like I'm tired of war. Like at some point, like you got to get tired of fighting everybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. If war worked, then we wouldn't have wars.
True. True. Very true. So I remember a conversation I had with a gentleman, and he was definitely from, a different culture, a different social class, and he was talking about choices. And the more he talked about choices, the more I thought about my own choices and the choices that I made or I didn't make, and what led me to my temporary demise as well. And I realized that there was a time in my life where I didn't understand I had a choice. I didn't. So I hear even now in these personal development books and all the great literature, you have a choice, you have a choice. But for a long time for me, that wasn't true. And I have a lot of peers right now who I try to talk to and say, hey, you got a choice, you can stop doing that. And they say, no, you're crazy. I don't have a choice. This is the way it has to be. How do you think, I don't know if you had that personal experience as well, but how do you think, has restorative justice helped you see more choices, or have you seen other individuals actualize and have a broader perspective of their own personal choices?
Well, yeah, it definitely has happened for me. But people used to always tell me when I was younger, you got A or you got B. You got A or you got B, right? And I didn't realize. So I'm going to talk about this on different levels. So on one level, when people always say you got A or you got B, it wasn't until I got older that I realized people were limiting me to 2 letters of the alphabet. They were limiting me to A or B, when in actuality, we got 26 letters in the alphabet. So why do I have to choose from A or B? Maybe that was that person's limited understanding of what choices had, just like my own understanding of what choices I had was limited. Now, on the other side of that, we also have to acknowledge that there is a structure, there is a systematic structure that is in place that actually limits, it works to limit people's perception of their choices, right? And so we have to deal with a lot of that, right? We have to deal with a lot of the systemic things that are in place that is actually causing people to feel this way, right? It's like one of my friends, and I'm gonna give a shout out to Ron Moss. One of my friends, he always says this. We always talk about crabs in the bucket. We always say, man, oh, this is crabs in the bucket. We put the crabs in the bucket, and all they do is pull each other down. All they do is pull each other down. But then he said, why is it that nobody never ever asked who put the crabs in the bucket? Crabs don't belong in a bucket. So we study focusing on the crabs in the bucket pulling each other down, and nobody ever asks, why are there crabs in the bucket? We're not looking at the environment. The crabs are not in their natural habitat, right? So when you have a people who our whole ancestry has been taken away, our whole history has been taken and hidden, and any time that we try to step into being our natural selves, it's met with criticism and ridicule, right? It's not even until recently that a law got passed with that makes it wrong to discriminate against a Black person wearing their natural hair to work. Right, so you're forced to be something other than yourself, and then we wonder why people are acting other than themselves. It just, I mean, that kind of logic, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, even I'm I'm thankful to be a part of the anti-racism task force here at Norco College, and we've had some of those discussions, and I have even brought up. This was many years ago when I was in the classroom. You know, I got passionate, and so I started talking, and just being myself. Because I was being myself, my intelligence was discredited, and that kind of
exactly
like deterred me from school. I didn't want to attend anymore, so that I think that it's a great thing that people are aware of that now, but it's still kind of sad,
Yeah, exactly, right. And that's the perfect example. Culturally, there are things that we just do differently. We display emotions differently in different ways sometimes, right? We may display the same emotions, but we may do it different in some cases, right? Culturally, certain things are not acceptable for us in our culture, but we don't have the dominant, we don't have a dominant force to dictate that to other people.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to us. How we act and how we should choose to act or be in public is being dictated by other people.
And that could be frustrating for a lot of people.
It's frustrating, and that's what causes people to believe, well, I don't have a choice, right? Because if I act me, then you're gonna say I ain't right. You're gonna discriminate against me. You're gonna be afraid of me. You're gonna be this, right? It's
it's deep.
It's deep. It's very deep.
Yeah.
I really hope the crowd, the students, or the people that are listening in, I really hope that they're understanding this. And if people are not, please chime in and ask me any question. I'm open. I'm open to ask any question. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Are there any questions right now, Jessica?
You just throw it to me that you got as deep as you could go, and then you're like, no, pass it to you.
No, I'm just curious. I have more, but if anybody wants to focus in on the choices, or because that was a pretty deep
there are actually, and right on this topic. So we had a couple of excellent questions from Dr. Janet Hill, who is a sociology professor and is also very active around these issues. So Dr. Hill asked, can you discuss the process of healing and how in the United States we have misunderstood the importance of healing and how it's related to the structural dynamics of race and class. Race and class has played a huge role in the trauma of people of color. And there's a need to understand the structure so we can understand the choices people make that may not be productive, but that are directly linked to the organization of society. So I think she's asking you to address healing, and specifically as it relates to racial trauma and class trauma in the United States.
Healing as it addresses to racial trauma and class trauma. Mm-hmm. Wow, this is well, I'm just speaking on what comes to my mind. Is that part? It is part of what we talked about, right? When I think about the racial trauma, I think about being taken from the motherland, being taken from Africa, being forced into a country where we were not permitted to speak our mother tongue. We were not permitted to even be educated. Our children were taken. Our culture was taken, and we were sold as somebody's property. So even when the Emancipation Proclamation happened, right? There was even money set up in the Freedmen Bank that was supposed to go to the free slaves. Dang near all of that money got taken, right? None of it actually reached the people. So none of us really got our 40 acres and a mule. So let's fast forward to the day, and we can go through all of the Jim Crows, the laundering laws that happened right after slavery happened. If you were, you say, okay, you guys are free, but then here comes the overseers come by and they see you standing around or they see you doing something. They come in and arrest you and they write you a ticket and force you to go work back on the plantation that you was just released from. But now you have to do it because you got a ticket, a citation for loitering. Then we can go through the black codes. We can go through so much that we had to have a whole civil rights movement just to ask people to be civil. Like, just be civil with me, right? I mean, I could line up so much historical things that have happened that is still to this day, it has an effect. Like I said, just recently, the law was signed Newsom signed the law saying that you can't discriminate against people wearing their natural hairstyles like in the office. So if you're prevented from moving ahead in society, and then you're discriminated against for not moving ahead in society, I mean, we're talking about, and then I can't even really talk about reparations, because if I start to talk about reparations, people don't even want to hear that conversation. Majority of people don't even understand what that conversation means or actually means. So, and all of this is simply based on the color of my skin, right? We can look at what's going on across America, like right now, right? We can look at what is going on, and I can get very political and not political. I don't necessarily, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm for what's right. Right. I'm for what's right. And I see things that's just not right. And we have to do something better. Like in this country, we can't sanction, we make excuses to discriminate against people in this country. And I could be more specific, but I'm actually trying not to. I don't want to necessarily offend people, but I do want to share the fact that as a Black person in this country, I have not felt like I'm really a part of this country. Right? Yeah, Obama gave us some hope, right? But we keep relying on hope and not actualities. We keep having to fight for equality, and we haven't been given equity, right? We haven't really been given a stake in this country, and I'm on another level. I'm so glad that our young people are standing up in a way that they're standing up differently now. So I got to give thanks for that, because younger generations, I think, are seeing some things, are seeing the flaws of our parents, and the racism in that. But if I don't have money, I mean, I can go into the class situation where everything is built around a capitalistic structure. That means that if you have money, you have all the fancy things that come with money. But if you don't have money, if you're not like born or don't have the silver spoon in your mouth, then you're not able to obtain the things that other people are, and we can blame that on work. We can blame that on a lot of different stuff. I feel like I am kind of rambling a little bit, but I just think there's so much work that we actually need to do in this country around race, around class. We need a whole new structure in this country that does not allow us to build more money than you can spend in 10 lifetimes, and then ride by a person homeless on the street and wonder why this person can't get a job when the rent, you know, is more than this person can make in a year. Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna stop there. I feel like I'm trying to be nice.
Yes. I'll chime in on that just for a second. I'll try to narrow it down to my own personal experience and my own personal healing. I'll go back just not that far as Troy, but I'll go back to us being called colored. You know, we're called colored, and then we were called Negroes. And when you read about the Negroes, you read about dignity. You read about W. Du Bois and college. I think about my grandfather in suspenders and, you know, trying to be a dignified man. That was a Negro. And then we go forward to now we call Black. And when I think about Black, I think about aggression. I think about the Black Power movement. I think about the Black Panthers. And I see, as I was doing my own personal studies, I saw that, you know, since before I was born, I was always existing inside somebody else's framework, right? So now once we fast forward to our culture and who we edify as people, and even who our women edify, you know, they edify the athletes, the entertainers, the people who basically rejected the system. And even for myself, I healed when I started rejecting the system. And I know that may sound crazy to people who haven't walked in my shoes or who don't understand, but my own personal evolution came from rejecting what everybody else told me Black was, you know, or being colored was. And I had to learn and understand what being a man was beyond my color. Right. But if I stayed inside my color in America, I would have never healed. I would have never had the freedom to be Sean. And unfortunately, to answer that question, I don't know if it is a collective. I don't know if America's ready for a collective solution, because it is tied into economics. It is tied into the structure. It's tied into framework and capitalism. So I don't know if we're ready to even answer that question. But on the individual level, what I have seen is that the guys who have in some way rejected society, those have been the ones to heal. And unfortunately, but that's a very, very dangerous road, because you can reject it and you can evolve, or you can reject it or you can devolve. So, absolutely, you know, it's critical. It's very critical, but just my own personal insight on that answer.
And I want to say this too, is that you made me think of a couple of points that, like, young growing up, the only thing that, like, I was told about my history was about slavery. That's all I was taught in this country about my history was slavery, right? You had an Underground Railroad, you know, you had Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. You know, Martin was about peace. You know, Malcolm was a little bit more radical, and both of them got killed, right? Both of them were assassinated. And so, you know, my history has been limited to American history. And then whenever Africa is spoken of, it typically is associated with Europe, right? Or at least the good parts, were deemed the good parts. There's an association with Europe. And then everything else is talked about as though it's backwards and Bush, right? And I haven't been given, I learned the truth of my history from a Black man on a prison tier. And that instilled some pride in me about who I really was and what the stock of people I come from, right? That gave me a sense of pride that nothing else did, right? And so that's another way, because it's psychological, right? If the only thing that I'm told about Blackness is that you was a slave, how can I rise to be above that when all of the great history, when you look out throughout the continent of Africa and you look at what Black people have contributed to this country and to the world, like, that isn't talked about. And I question, and I wonder why. You know, I question why. You know, and I was just reading a lot about from Dr. Claude Anderson, who wrote, you know, Powernomics. And I was just reading a lot from him. And, you know, he, you know, we have to, there has to be change. We have to produce something more in this country than sweat, you know, than being the top athlete, you know, like there has to be change in this country. And I feel it's coming, you know, I feel it's coming. And, you know, I'm thankful that it's coming, and it's time, it's long overdue.
You guys have people excited to participate in dialogue now. So I've got just a quick comment from Dr. Hill, and then another question. So Dr. Hill connected this discussion back to carceral systems and systems of prosecution, saying the criminal justice system is a structure that comes from slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and the prison industrial complex is a direct result of this, which has affected both of you as well as millions of people of color. So let us sit with that for a second. And then Javelin asked about, I'm going to rephrase a little bit, but so Javelin asked about the movement for racial justice that we've seen really come to a head this summer, and calls for police accountability. And so I want to kind of take that question back to the notion of restorative justice and ask whether your experience with restorative justice have given any insight into how we might achieve police accountability.
Well, you know, I was a part of what we used to call the barbershop forum, and we used to we had formerly incarcerated people, police officers, community activists, and community people. We would sit inside a room and have some really deep conversations, right? In the beginning, it was a lot of shouting and FUs. It started off as very tense. But from that, I realized this much, that I don't want to demonize any whole group of people because they wear a particular uniform, right? And I say that fully understanding how the police is seen and have acted as an extension of overseers traditionally, you know, in our community, from overseers way back from the plantation, right? So I understand that. I understand that historical context. And I gotta say that I cannot demonize all police no more than I can sanctify all the homies in the hood, right? And so I walked away with some people I call friends, right? Some people I call and have dinner with, you know? And I walked away from other people that, like, I wouldn't trust this dude as far as I can see, right? And I think that's like, I think that is, I think that's a part of just being human, right? Like it's easy just to categorize everybody and throw them in this one lump sum, right? But the more that you start to have dialogue with people, the more that you start to communicate with people, you start to see commonalities that bind you and that bond you together, right? And I think that that's the whole concept of, you know, restorative justice, is that we have to be able to engage in dialogue. And sometimes these dialogues are a long conversation. Sometimes, you know, like there are some dialogues that you just have to sit and be in and continue to discuss and build, and continue to talk and wrestle over hardships with each other and continue that. And I think that that's what we need more of our community. And like one of our early dialogues, the police used to say, certain officers, you know, used to say, well, you know, you guys need to let us know who's doing this and hold the people in your community accountable, right? And if people doing wrong, then we need to know, because we can't help solve the crimes if you guys don't let us know. And my response to them was, when you do it, we'll do it. right? So don't hold me to a different standard if you're not willing to stand up to that same standard. So I say what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? So if you want me to stand up and be the outspoken person and be this, then you got to do the same thing in the police department when you see your buddy's not doing something right, when he's doing something that's against the fabric of the uniform that you wear, right? So it has to be that restorative justice is not the absence of accountability, right? It's to build a bridge, a bond in our community to restore the web, the fabric of our community. That's what restorative justice is intended to be, right? And we just have to keep having this real serious like dialogue with each other and try to come to an understanding and try to like support each other and not like polarize ourselves among sides. I think that's the most dangerous thing that we can do, is just to polarize myself against another person simply because they wear a different uniform, you know, or they look a different kind of way. I think if we're gonna be humanity, then we have to stand up for humanity, and what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong, no matter who does it.
Awesome. Awesome.
Ready for more questions?
Ready?
Or Sean, did you have any other topics that you wanted to move on before
No, I'll take another question. I can just tie it on to the end, my question.
Sounds good. Okay. So actually, Dr. Nelson had some questions about the creative process. We haven't really talked too much about the film yet. Troy, can you tell us how you got involved in the film and what it was like making the film?
Oh wow, that's a good question. So if you watch the film, if you look in pieces of it, you'll see me with less gray. You'll see me in certain parts of it. You can actually see me in the film. So I was serving a life sentence when Catherine Hervey and Massimo, when they first came in, and she started to direct the film. Now, I was sort of the self-appointed ambassador for the yard. So whenever I saw a prison camera or a camera show up on the yard, I felt it was my duty to interact with whoever was behind that camera, because I wanted to know why they were there, what story that they was trying to tell, and if they had intentions on demonizing us. And I wanted to have a dialogue with them about the story that they were producing, because, you know, we just on the yard, we watched so many people over the years come in and they tell us they're gonna do a good story, and then next thing you know, they're demonizing, you know, they're doing the fearmonger tactics, right? That traditionally happens about, you know, about prison. They waiting on the fight to happen so that they can talk about the fight instead of talking about the other issues that we felt were important to us and to not only just our transformation, but we got tired of people glorifying the violence in prison as though that's all that we were, as though I was the same 20-something-year-old that committed the crime. And we just saw this even with the COVID cases. We just saw the media do this with the COVID cases when they were talking about COVID in San Quentin. They had to talk about the guy being on death row, and they had to talk about why he was on death row. That had nothing to do with COVID. That had nothing to do with the blunder of CDCR transferring people with COVID into a prison that had 0 cases, right? But that's the when we create that and we talk about what this person did, we're subconsciously telling people don't care about that. They're not worthy of your care, right? Or your concern. And so I felt it was my duty to interact with people, even if it's just to let them know that some of us understand media in a way that you may not think, because I produce too, and that and to try to give them a piece of interaction that would help them see our humanity, so that they would hold the story with more care and more concern. And so, but when I met Catherine, like I was like, I was appreciative of who she was, and I was appreciative of what I felt her intent was for creating the film. And so I just started off, like I said, I didn't know if I was ever going to come home. So I just wanted to help out in the background. I started helping with camera, holding the boom, doing the, getting sound and, other little things that you do, on a movie shoot. And it wasn't until after I came home that we got in contact, and then they asked me to be a part of the film with the outside voice, to be a part of the film. And it's been over 6 years in the making, and it's a beautiful thing to watch it from out here. Yeah, it's been beautiful. I hope I answered your question, but.
You did, and you gave me a chance to plug you, so which I want to do. I know I did this in your bio, but your company, your media company is Restorative Media. Is that correct? In case people want to check it out.
Yes, Restorative Media. The website is about to go up, and it'll be up in a little while. But in the meantime, people can also find me at TroyWilliamsJournal.com. But yeah, I'm about to officially launch my website. It probably won't be ready till around January, but I got something really powerful in store for people. So be on the lookout.
A related question I want to ask both of you that Dr. Nelson also brought up was, so you're both involved in carceral reform and in activism. How does the creative process relate to both your activism and to your own personal healing? So how does the creative process inform your public work and your own personal growth?
Are you saying the creative process with filmmaking?
Yep. Or whatever kind of creative work you engage in.
Well, I feel like when you're in that creative zone, I feel like you tap into that God principle. Like you tap into creativity in a way that it's soothing for me. Like I feel like I'm connected in a different kind of way. I mean, just the whole process of figuring out how do I communicate what's in my head to people in a way that they can actually like receive it. Like I feel tapped in. It's a little harder like on the webinar because I really can't. I love to engage more with the crowd and kind of see faces and really like have personal like interactions. But I love that. I feel like there's a connectivity that happens when you're in that creative zone, whether it's speaking or whether creating a scene or filming a scene or in some kind of other dialogue with somebody. I love it. Like I feel free. Like I feel like I feel like the only restrictions I have, they're in my head and I can find workarounds. Like I feel like in many ways, like I have no restrictions. I just have to, my only restriction I have is my ability to think outside of the restriction that I think I have. That was a tongue twister, huh?
I definitely agree with Troy. For myself, you just, for one, I'm in school, I have taken quite a few courses now, but to me, my self-education is strong. I've read and I've developed in a way that I wanted to develop. It's like intrinsic in who I am. So because of that, I move in that flow. And when I move in that flow, I'm free because I don't think of this framework or, I'm not so didactic in who I am. I'm just very free to move and make decisions. So as I move forward, I just see things. So in my activism right now, trying to figure out how to bring an entrepreneurial program for formerly incarcerated to the IE, because there isn't anything out here but warehouse work. You know, and I think that I don't think that that's our best fit coming out, and especially if you did the work, right? So I was out and I was doing things and I was going through these processes. And like I say, that intrinsic education and that nature and that development, it just starts speaking. Well, why can't we do this? Why can this not like this? And then, you know, you go start researching and you start looking and talking, and next thing you know, you have a project. And I think that it's natural when you develop in a certain way. And I think a lot of creative people, they experience that, or they go through that flow where it's just a natural thing, and you just move forward and you identify problems or things you might not like. And as Troy said, you figure out how to express that in a way that's acceptable. But I think it definitely has to do with our intrinsic development.
Thank you so much. So I have a question in the chat. This is for Troy. So San Quentin is just one of 34 adult institutions run by CDCR. We also have jails and federal prisons in California. Do you know of any other prisons or carceral settings that are conducting similar restorative justice programs? And what can we do to increase the availability of restorative justice inside our prisons and jails?
That's a really good question. Yes, there are more opportunities, not nearly enough, but there are more organizations that are going inside of prisons. I think COVID definitely has slowed a lot of things down with regards to that. Even like right now, people haven't been allowed all year to see their loved ones inside of prison. And so I think part of it is that we have to be, get attached to an organization. There are different organizations that are doing work inside of prisons, whether it's Uncommon Law, whether it's ARC, ARC, or the Inside Prison Project, or the Rites of Passage program. They have a lot of different programs that are going inside of prisons, and they have a lot of organizations. ARC is doing some stuff. All of Us and None are doing things around policy. So we have to get behind these policies and these organizations that are pushing for CDCR to make a change, right? To allow opportunities, because we have to remember, people are coming home. And if we don't give people an opportunity for preparation before they come home, how are they going to come home, right? They're going to come home struggling, right? They're going to come home trying to figure out what they're going to do. And instead of coming home already having an idea and being able to, push their ideas forward and just be supportive of people. So I guess that's the first thing I can say. The biggest thing I can say is that get behind organizations that are doing the work and follow their lead on stuff that they're doing, assist in whatever ways these organizations are, and also to realize that adopt a prison, right? A lot of prisons are out in these very remote and secluded areas. And if nobody's watching what's going on inside of these prisons, people aren't always treated humanely, right? Because nobody's watching. So we need to make sure that people inside of these places are being treated with some dignity and some humanity. And so that when they do come home, that they feel a part of a larger community. And, I tell people like this, me as a gangbanger, I protected my community. The fact is, the sad part is that there were people I didn't see as a part of my community. And so I was more willing to do wrong to people I didn't see as a part of my community. But if you was a part of my community, I protected you with my life. So we have to stop giving off this perception that some of us are not a part of our community. Like, let's make everybody feel like we're part of one big community, and then we can have different ways to do things and build and grow. And so when people do come home, or even while people are in there, I've watched men inside a prison stop drive-bys on the phone call. You know, we have to think about the power that's inside of these walls that we're locking away that could actually benefit our community. You know, what if, like, a lot of the work that I'm doing at home now and across the country, and there are thousands of other men and women across this country that I personally know that are doing, you know, when we talk about passing the Amendment 4 in Florida, like almost 1,000 of us met up in Florida to help get that amendment passed, right? And I'm talking executives of companies or organizations, people working with every type of education, whether it's law enforcement or college or, you know, nonprofit organizations or even for-profit organizations. You had people who are moving in a way to like create change and effective change, and that reaches back to the block. And when that reaches back to the block, that's how we gonna do away with crime, and we're gonna do away with this when we can stop othering each other.
I just want to reiterate some of those organizations' names for folks who are interested in getting involved. So you mentioned ARC, which is the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. Anti-Recidivism Coalition. I'll say it, can't really say it slow. It's hard to say slow, but I'll say it again so people can get it down. Uncommon Law, All of Us or None. That's a real activist grassroots organization, so very easy to get involved in. All of Us or None. Let's see. I'll also raise Californians for Safety and Justice. If you're interested in influencing policy, they have some, you know, easy like phone banking and stuff you can do. Californians for Safety and Justice. Anything I'm missing, guys? Organizations that folks can get involved in for reform?
I mean, there are so many organizations. I actually should put together a list of various organizations, but there are so many. I mean, you can look up different organizations and check them out. Like, I don't, if we can, you know, if I start calling out organizations, I know I'm gonna miss a few. I'm thinking about Time for Change, Choices for Freedom. Like, there are so many different organizations that are like doing work now that are actually, a lot of them are led by other formerly incarcerated people as well. And so, like Google. Is that wrong to say that? Google it.
John, do you have anyone you want to shout out?
I know for sure we have Time Done, as in this area is ran by a guy named Terrence Stewart. He's formerly incarcerated, but he's the director, state director, and he's located in Colton. He's doing a lot of work in the Inland Empire, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. He does a lot of work with the youth. He just does a lot of work. Today, he had a webinar on financial literacy for Time Done. So yeah, so I would just recommend him because I know he's very passionate about, and he's local. And they have a Starting Over who I do work with them, and that's in the IE as well. So those two for sure. All of Us or None also has a Riverside chapter. Yeah. So Starting Over and All of Us or None are kind of tied in together.
Yes.
So yeah. So
also, if you're looking to donate, those are both great.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So once you get involved with one of those, you'll kind of just proliferate and find more.
And don't forget Restorative Media.
Yeah, Restorative Media.
Yeah.
Yeah, also for folks looking to learn more, you can always look to the Marshall Project, really great reporting on prison issues. That's the Marshall Project. Okay, so I got two back-to-back questions that I'm seeing as related, so I'm going to ask them just right back to back. So Carla asked, how do you see the potential of those coming home to change their families, communities, and our society? So, you know, upon reentry, what is the power that folks have to contribute to transformative change? And Michelle asked, or she said, thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge. I have a question. How can we help people look beyond the stigma that society has towards people who are incarcerated?
Oh wow, that's a good one. Can I go first on this one?
Yeah,
please. Okay. Well, I think that the people who are coming home, those are the ones who are going to affect the change, because, like I said, it may be an aberration in other cultures, but especially in inside certain cultures, it's either the guys that have rejected certain things or status quo that have a certain level of respect and even admiration. So those guys are the ones who can really come back and reach the community because people listen. And that's the issue now, as Troy was saying, about why we need to sit at the table are people like us, because we're the ones who can really get out there and affect change. Like I say, I have somebody I talk to right now that's still incarcerated, and I send him books and he listens to me. You know, he's in school because of me. You know, he's doing these things because of me, not because of the counselor, not because of anybody else, but because Sean said, do this, it's gonna work. And, you know, I'm pretty sure Troy has hundreds of people like that. And so we are the ones who are going to make the change because we are the ones who have the experience, and we can say, hey, the water is really hot. It burnt me here. Look at the burn. And you can feel it in our voice. You can feel the passion to where somebody who doesn't have the experience. And the second question I would say is stop looking at us as a deficit. You know, stop trying to put us in a framework where we don't belong. As you see, Troy is well-spoken. He's very intelligent. You know, he's already a CEO, but he could have been like that 5 or 6 years ago. You know, you have to see us from an asset lens and what are our benefits, and stop saying the best we can do is move a box. You know, that's the worst thing you could do for somebody who's made a mistake, anybody who's made a mistake, because when you make a mistake or you realize yourself, you look in the mirror and you see yourself clearly, then you can talk to other people about that and you can live a life of service. And that's the best thing that any of us can do in these situations, is be of service to our communities.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, and I think I spoke on it a little bit already when I talked about how we showed up in Florida, and most of the organizations I named, I see somebody else also put Initiate Justice. That's another. I got a few friends that work for them as well, right? And so like as far as us coming home with the ability to change our families, and I'm watching it in real time. Like, you know, I pulled up, you know, where I grew up at, I pulled up on my turf. And I ain't been over there in 25 years, right? Literally almost 25 or 30 years. Like, it's been a minute since I actually just went over and just like hung out. And it was a few of us G's that had been home that like had been gone for 20, 25 years. And to watch how the younger people like were reacting to us, like, you know, you listen to all the hip hop music, right? And they talk about the OGs are dead or in jail. Well, the OGs are home now. And my conversations with my young homeboys was, what you gonna do for your family besides something that's gonna get you taken away from them? So I'm able to have a conversation. I'm able to be on the block and be like, we ain't doing this block boy stuff no more. Like, I'm able to have that conversation and been like, how we gonna build something for your family and your seed? I'm able to have that conversation in real time on the block, right? And so I'm watching how it's changing the dynamic, right? You know, there's some unfortunate parts, right? The unfortunate part is that sometimes with family, like, because I've been gone so long, it's created a distance from my family, even especially like my children. It's created a distance that can be difficult to repair. But we working it. We working at it. We gonna stay working at it. But I'm watching, like, when we show up at a juvenile hall or we show up at a facility and we show up on the block or whatever, as soon as we start to have this conversation with people, instant credibility, because they know we've been there, done that, right? They already know that's Big Bone. Big Bone been on the block for real, right? So they already know. So our conversation, and then they watch me, like they've been watching me. They've been watching my social media for the last 6 years. They've been watching my movement. And so now I got homies that call me and they like, man, like, how do I do it? How do I change? How do I go through this, right? And so I'm walking with them. I just was able a couple of weeks ago, we had 23 people we took up in the mountains with, you know, men and their partners. We took them up in the mountains with some young people, and we had a whole weekend retreat. right? We had a whole, and the young people, when they first got there, the only reason they like, the only reason we came is because you had us come. Like, they didn't even really want to be there. And by the time the weekend ended, they was like, we want to stay 2 more days. They didn't want to leave. So change is happening, right? When I look at even like All of Us or None, I look at people like, Dorsey Nunn, like Desmond Meade in Florida, like Kim Carter, who's running her organization that was a CNN hero, right? Like Dr. Marilyn Johnson, who she came home and she's a doctorate now, right? Like, I got all these people, Jerry Elster, who's a doctorate now. He's going back into a prison system to work as a drug and alcohol counselor after getting his doctorate, right? So we making change, right? The real dudes are home now, and we saying that we messed up, we led y'all wrong, we followed some wrong stuff, and now it's time to make some real change. Let us help you, right? Let us help you. We gonna walk with you hand in hand. And I tell them, I don't care if it's 2:00 in the morning. You can call me. You can call me. You need somebody to talk to. I'm not putting myself in danger. I ain't going back. I can't give them no more time. I done gave them all I'm gonna give them. But I'm gonna be there with you every step of the way. All the emotional and mental stuff that you need help or support or conversations with, I got you. I got you. And that's making the world a difference. We're allowing our boys, trying to put our boys in the position so that they can just be boys. They don't have to grow up fast anymore.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so Sean, I'm going to give it back to you to close it out. But first, I want to just thank both of you. It's been powerful, it's been deep, it's been thought-provoking, and so I just want to thank you so much for an amazing dialogue this evening.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I just have one question. Like I say, being that this is a community college, and community college I think is important. I heard you talk about the college in Hayward. How crucial do you feel the community college plays in the role of reentry?
Well, I'm hoping that, well, first I want to just thank, even Norco College for, the program that you guys have started there. And I really hope that, if the chancellor's listening or if people are on board, that I really hope that they see how much of an impact that allowing people who have transformed their lives, like, have an opportunity in this, right? Because the fact is, what we learned on our college campus is that, like, people are there, they there, you just don't know about it. Because people don't feel comfortable, or because maybe they're not able to share that they're there, but they're there. Now think about, creating an environment where people can thrive. Like you guys have created an environment. You guys are creating an environment where people can now thrive. They can show up and as they are, and because of you, counselors and teachers and other people who have that understanding can help continue to navigate them on a path to success. And that in and of itself is going to reach back into the community in a way that I don't even think we fully appreciate right now. Because it's going to take a few years for the data to catch up, right? Like colleges and universities is like data driven, right? It may take a few years for the data to catch up, but trust me, it has an effect. I watch it. I could fill you guys' auditorium up with people, formerly incarcerated people who have their degrees are on campuses right now studying, Project Rebound, right? There's a college now, there's a program on every campus, mostly every community college campus across this country, and people are navigating their ways into universities and other institutions so that they can do something different and better with their life, and that's what we need. We just continue support, like Jessica, thank you, like Lisa Nelson, like thank you guys for all of the work that you're doing to give back to people so that people can have a trajectory towards success. I'll say this, I know I can get long-winded sometime, but I want to say this. I came home from Youth Authority. And when I came home, everywhere I met was rejection. I alternately went back to the street and picked up a pistol because the only people that accepted me was the block, was the homies, right? Everybody else rejected me. And so we have a decision to make, right? Like what we try to do on our campus, we have to make sure that when somebody comes home, that their first acclimation to the street is the college campus. Why? Because when stuff starts to go wrong, they're going to come to the counselor for support. They're going to go talk to Sean because Sean is the head of the program. Sean going to point them toward the resources that they need, right? They're going to go talk to different people on campus, or if they just want to hang out, they're going to come hang out in the library, right? And if they're in the library, sooner or later, they're going to pick up a book. They're going to do what everybody else doing. They're going to be practicing for class. So now we're giving them something different. Whereas if they first acclimation is to the block, when they start to get stressed, guess who they're going to go ask for help, right? So we're actually working to prevent this whole cycle of recidivism and incarceration by opening up this door, and that in and of itself is going to transfer to that person's child, that person's children, that person's, or whoever is in that person's life, right? So that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I think that concludes our dialogue. I just want to say thank you to Norco College, ASNC, and you, Dr. Cobb, Dr. Nelson, because you guys are very special to me. And thank you as well, Troy. We really appreciate you. It's been great.
Oh yeah, and I got to apologize. I've been just calling her Lisa, Jessica. I'm sorry, Doctor. Doctor's on the line. That's right. Right. Thank you too, son. I appreciate you, young brother, and the work that you're doing, man. You're ahead of the game, man. Keep it up. Stay focused.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you both, and thank you to all our attendees.